"You're not on the list this year, Sylvia. The protocol changed. It's a restructured event." That is what my husband said to me on a Tuesday evening in October, 11 days before the Fenwick Capital annual gala. He said it the way you say a logistical thing, the way you say the dry cleaning isn't ready or the reservation is at 7:30, not 8. Flat. Informational. Already decided. I had attended that gala for 9 consecutive years. I had organized 3 of them. I had personally seated the tables for 2 of them and written the remarks for the one where Richard received his first vice president citation. I had worn the same earrings for 4 straight years because the senior partners' wives had told me they were elegant, and I had learned, in 9 years, which details the right people remember. "The protocol changed," he said. He did not look up from his laptop. "I want you to hold that sentence." Not as cruelty, though it was that. As a statement of fact from someone who had already made all the decisions and filed them somewhere I could not reach. He had replaced me. He had done it carefully, over time, and he had finished the job 11 days before the event so that I would not have enough runway to ask the right questions. What he did not know, what he had not thought to ask, because he had not thought to ask anything about me in quite some time, was that I had already spent 60 days asking those questions myself. Let me tell you what he did at that gala. And let me tell you precisely what a CEO with a microphone did when he thought he had gotten away with it. My name is Sylvia Harmon. I am 41 years old. I was a corporate attorney at Marlowe and Associates in Chicago for 12 years. Contracts. M&A advisory. The kind of work that requires you to read documents with the specific attention of someone who understands that the important thing is always in the clause, no one underlined. I grew up in Evanston. My father was a circuit court judge. My mother was a high school principal. I do not say this to establish credentials. I say it because the things you grow up around become the things you look for. I looked for precision. I looked for the evidence behind the claim. I looked, when I met my husband, for someone who seemed to be building something real. Richard Harmon was 29 when I met him. He was a junior account manager at Fenwick Capital, a mid-size investment firm on the 42nd floor of a building in the Loop. He was smart in the particular way of someone who understood people, who could read a room, work a table, make a client feel attended to without performing the attention. He was building something. He was not yet entirely sure what. We met at a benefit dinner my firm was co-sponsoring. He was seated at my table through a guest list overlap neither of us had arranged. He asked, after the 3rd course, what I actually did not as a social question, but because he was genuinely interested. He listened to the full answer. He asked a follow-up question. We were married 3 years later. I want to be precise about the years between that dinner and the October evening when Richard told me I was no longer on the list. Precision matters here, because the thing that was taken from me was not my marriage. The thing that was taken was 11 years of directed, specific, consequential labor, and he had taken it so gradually that neither of us had ever formally named what it was. I was at Marlowe and Associates through the first 5 years of our marriage. I billed hours, managed client relationships, made associate in year 3, and began building toward partner track. Richard was moving up at Fenwick, junior account manager to senior, then director, then VP of client relations. He was good at it. He was also now invited to events I attended, introduced to contacts I maintained, seen in rooms I had worked to enter. I want to be careful here. I did not resent his success. What I am telling you is the sequence, the way things moved, and what I did to make them move. In year 6 of our marriage, our daughter Nadia was born. We decided, in the way couples decide things that seem balanced at the time and reveal themselves later to be otherwise, that I would reduce my hours. That someone needed to be reachable when the school called. That Richard's trajectory was accelerating and mine could resume when things stabilized. Things stabilized, as they do, into a new normal. I left Marlowe in year 8, not dramatically, not in a crisis. I simply stopped renewing my engagement with cases that required the hours I no longer had. I retained one client I stayed in close contact with, Marcus Harrington, a private equity principal I had worked with for 4 years before I left the firm. We had lunch twice a year. I updated him on the market. He valued the conversation and continued to seek it out. In year 9, I began attending Fenwick Capital events as Richard's wife, not as my own person, as his extension. The one who remembered the senior partner's children's names, who knew which clients preferred to discuss sports and which preferred policy, who arrived at every event with the precise level of preparation that looked effortless because it was not being credited to anyone. I organized the table seating for the 2019 Gala. I wrote Richard's remarks for the 2021 VP citation ceremony, the remarks that 3 partners later referenced in their own internal communications as exactly the right tone. I introduced Marcus Harrington to James Fenwick, Eleanor's father, then still active at the firm, at the 2020 fundraiser. That introduction became the Harrington account, $47 million in managed assets. Fenwick Capital's largest single client relationship for 3 consecutive years. I did not receive a title for any of this. I received no salary. I received, instead, the assumption that this was simply what a supportive marriage looked like. That contribution without documentation was the same as contribution without consequence. That assumption was the thing Richard had built his confidence on, and it had a very specific flaw. I had kept the documentation myself. Dani Price had been Richard's executive assistant for 2 years before I noticed the shape of what was happening. I want to be honest about this. I noticed it slowly, the way you notice a temperature change, not as a single event, but as an accumulation of small calibrations. The way he angled his phone on the counter when he set it down. The way certain work calls now happened from the car, the door half closed. The way the language of distance had entered our house, not confrontation, not cruelty, just a gradual withdrawal of the assumption of shared space. I began paying attention in June. By August, I had called my attorney. Her name is Claudette Moore, 22 years in family law in Cook County. She is the kind of attorney who does not express surprise at what people do. She reserves that response for the quality of the evidence they leave behind. She said, "Tell me what you know and what you can document." Those are 2 different conversations. I told her what I knew. She told me what to document. In September, Claudette filed a preservation order on jointly held financial accounts, standard procedure in the early stage of what might become a divorce proceeding. Richard was not notified. At that stage, he was not required to be. That same week, Claudette's financial analyst began reviewing 18 months of statements across accounts attached to Richard's name. She found what she was looking for in month 4 of the review window, a consulting contract. Billed to Fenwick Capital as a third-party vendor engagement. The vendor was a limited liability company registered in Delaware in January of that year. The registered agent was Dani Price, $140,000, 18 months. Clean transfers, each structured in amounts that stayed below automatic flagging thresholds, filed under a project code that did not correspond to any active Fenwick initiative. Richard had created a salary for her. He had funded it from a corporate account he controlled as VP of Client Relations. He had built the structure carefully enough that, at a glance, it read as routine. It was not. It was the financial architecture of someone who had been planning long enough to understand the importance of appearance. Claudette called me on a Thursday morning in early October. She said, "We have what we need. How do you want to proceed?" I said, "Not yet." A pause. "Sylvia." I said, "There is a gala on the 14th. I want to see what he does at the gala first." Another pause, longer. She said, "Understood." The 11 days between Richard's announcement and the gala were quiet ones. I did not confront him. I did not change anything he could read. I made dinner. I attended Nadia's school performance on the 7th. I had lunch with a former colleague on the 10th. On the 11th of October, I called Eleanor Fenwick. Eleanor had been CEO of Fenwick Capital for 3 years since her father's retirement. She was 53. I had known her for 9, first as a guest at firm events, then as someone she had developed a specific regard for. She was the kind of person who noticed what others did not notice, and who filed those observations rather than discarding them. She had told me once, at a benefit dinner in 2022, that the Harrington account was the most significant new client relationship the firm had built in a decade. She had asked how it had come together. I had told her the truth. Marcus Harrington was my contact. The introduction had come through me, not through the firm. She had said, "I thought so." On October 11th, I called her directly, not through the firm's main line. Her direct number, which she had given me at the 2022 dinner, because she had said that reaching her through a switchboard was a courtesy she generally did not require of people she found worth talking to. I said, "Eleanor, I need to tell you something about your firm's books." She said, "I'm listening." I told her about the consulting contract, the Delaware LLC, the $140,000, the project code with no corresponding initiative. The silence that followed was long enough that I began to think the call had dropped. Then she said, "We've had an internal audit flag on that project code for 60 days. I have been waiting to understand where it led." I said, "Now you know." A pause. "Are you coming to the gala, Sylvia?" I said, "I was told I was not on the list." She said, "You are now." The Fenwick Capital Gala was held at the Chicago Riverside Club on October 14th. Black tie, 400 guests. The kind of event where the room knows how to read entrances, who arrives with whom, who is seated where, who receives acknowledgement from the stage, and in what order. I arrived alone. I wore the gown I had purchased in September before Richard told me I was not invited because I had known, on some level, that I was going to need it. Black, structured, the kind of dress that requires nothing from you once you put it on. I wore the same earrings I had worn for 4 consecutive years because the right people remember those details, and I had always found consistency more legible than spectacle. The registration desk confirmed my name on the list. I walked into the room. Richard was already there. He was at table 4, near the window, the preferred position for senior leadership and their guests, the table I had organized seating for in 3 previous years. He was in a tuxedo. Beside him, in a dress that was formal and correct, and carrying a color slightly too bright for the room's register, was Dani Price. She was in my seat, not metaphorically. The placement card at the position I had occupied for 9 consecutive years had a different name on it. It had been printed, not handwritten, not adjusted last minute, which meant it had been arranged with enough lead time to go through the gala's production process. He had planned this, not spontaneously, deliberately, in advance. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment because precision requires it. Not the anger was present, but it was not the primary thing. The primary thing was recognition. The specific experience of watching someone show you, in a single composed image, the full shape of what they had decided you were worth. He had put her in my chair. He had brought her to my event, in front of my contacts, at the table where I had spent 9 years constructing the conditions for his visibility. He had done all of this without, I was entirely certain, once considering that I might walk through that door anyway. Eleanor's staff had placed me at table 1, adjacent to the stage. I sat down. I introduced myself to the woman on my left. We discussed the architecture of the building, the way the river looked from this particular angle in October. The appetizers were good. I noted this because small, true details help you stay in your body when other parts of your mind are running the calculations that need to be run. I did not look at table 4. I did not need to. I need to stop for a moment. Because some of you listening to this know what it is to walk into a room and find your chair has been given to someone else. Maybe it wasn't a gala. Maybe it was a meeting, a family dinner, a position you had built and were not formally told you'd lost. You simply arrived one day and found someone already sitting in it. And maybe you stayed. Maybe you found another seat. Maybe you sat in it calmly while everything inside you was running very fast. Drop a comment right now. Tell me, has someone ever replaced you somewhere you had built? And what happened when they realized you hadn't left the room? I read every single one. Drop it now. The award portion of the evening began at 9 o'clock. The gala had always included a formal recognition segment, industry acknowledgments, internal citations, the annual markers of institutional significance. 3 awards typically. 25 minutes, well-produced, predictable in the way of events that have been run the same way for many years. Eleanor Fenwick took the stage at 9:14. She was in navy, the firm's color. She moved with the particular ease of someone who has run a room long enough to understand that the room adjusts to her rather than the reverse. She began with the firm's year in review, client growth, expansion of the institutional portfolio, the direction of their managed assets strategy for the coming year. She was precise. She was warm. She did not rush. Then she said, "Before we move to our formal recognitions this evening, I want to introduce an award that Fenwick Capital has not presented before. We are calling it the Client Legacy Award. It is intended to recognize a contribution to this firm's client relationships that is significant enough, and in this particular case, long enough overdue, that we felt it deserved its own moment." The room adjusted to this. 400 people recalibrated. "The Harrington account," Eleanor continued, "represents $47 million in managed assets and has been our most significant single client relationship for 3 consecutive years. It was introduced to this firm in 2020 by a woman who, at that time, held no title at Fenwick Capital. She was not on our payroll. She was not seeking credit. She knew Marcus Harrington through her own professional history, believed in what we were building, and made an introduction because she believed it was the right one. She asked for nothing in return." A pause. "That is the kind of contribution that does not appear on an org chart. It does not appear in a performance review. It does not appear in the annual VP citation ceremony." Another pause, deliberate, "But it is the kind of contribution I have been thinking about for 3 years. And I believe it is time it appeared somewhere." She looked up. "Sylvia Harmon, would you come up, please? I want to tell you what the walk from table 1 to that stage felt like, because it is the detail I return to most often when I think about that night. It was not long, perhaps 35 feet. Past table 3 and the window, and the arrangement of 400 people who had just heard Eleanor Fenwick say my name. Past a tuxedo and a printed placement card, and a dress in a color that was slightly too bright for the room's register. I did not look at that table. I walked to the stage the way I had been taught, a long time ago, to walk into any room I had earned, not quickly, not performing anything, simply present. I took the award from Eleanor's hands. She leaned slightly toward the microphone and said, quietly enough for only the nearest tables, "We've had some administrative matters to address this week. Thank you for the information, Sylvia." I said, "Thank you for the seat." She smiled. It was a precise smile, the kind that contains a full sentence. I returned to table 1. The remaining awards were presented. The dinner concluded. The evening ended in the way of formal events that have accomplished what they set out to accomplish, cleanly, on time, without drama that was not already built into the program. Richard did not approach me. He left at 9:47. I know this because the building lobby requires passing the registration desk, and the registration staff, with whom I had worked alongside for 3 gala evenings, noted his departure without being asked. He did not speak to me. He had understood, somewhere between Eleanor's microphone and the 35 feet to the stage, that the shape of the evening was not what he had arranged. He did not yet know the full dimensions of what was coming, but he understood enough to leave without speaking. That was, I thought, an accurate read of the room. Claudette filed the divorce petition on October 17th, 3 days after the gala. The consulting contract, $140,000 rooted through Dani Price's Delaware LLC over 18 months, was classified under Illinois law as dissipation of marital assets. Richard had used funds from an account containing both firm compensation and jointly held investment returns to build a fraudulent vendor structure that benefited his executive assistant. Claudette's financial analyst produced a full reconstruction, 22 individual transfers, each kept deliberately below automatic review thresholds. Careful, systematic, documented in its entirety by the person who executed it. Fenwick Capital's internal audit concluded its findings on October 21st. Richard was placed on administrative leave. He was terminated on November 3rd. The termination letter cited breach of fiduciary duty and unauthorized use of firm accounts. It was not a quiet exit. It was the kind of exit that travels, through professional networks, through the specific speed at which Chicago's financial community processes information about one of its own. The kind of exit that appears when someone runs a background check or a due diligence review and types the correct name into the correct field. The divorce proceedings moved through Cook County over the following 7 months. The civil judgment included full restitution of the $140,000, reclassified as marital property subject to complete recovery. The marital home, which I had maintained, managed, and furnished for 11 years, was retained in full. Richard's pension, accumulated during the years when my labor had freed him to accumulate it, was divided according to Illinois statute. The legal fees were covered by the judgment. Dani Price's consulting arrangement with Fenwick Capital was voided as part of the firm's internal review findings. She resigned in November. The LLC was dissolved. In December, my phone rang on a Wednesday morning. Marcus Harrington said, "I heard what happened at the gala. I heard what Eleanor said." A pause. "I have been thinking about moving my assets to independent management. I'd like to talk about what that might look like with you involved." I said, "I'll have something prepared by Friday." I am not a registered investment advisor. I could not manage his portfolio directly. What I could do, and what I spent the following 3 months building, was return to Marlowe and Associates as a senior consultant, anchoring the structure around the Harrington relationship. He brought 2 additional contacts with him. The transition took 4 months. It was not simple. It was not fast, but it was his to give, and it had always been mine to earn. That is how client relationships work when they are built on the right foundation. The firm does not own them. The person who built them carries them. You cannot take a professional relationship the way you take a placement card off a table, remove one name, add another, assume the underlying thing transfers. The seat has a name on it. The relationship has a history. And history does not reorganize itself to accommodate whoever arrived most recently. If you are listening to this, and you have spent years building something that carries no title, no formal credit, no placement card with your name on it, something that exists only in the rooms and relationships and records that no one thought to document, I want to say this carefully. The people who remove your name from the list are counting on something specific. They are counting on the idea that absence is the same as disappearance, that if you do not show up to claim what you built, you have agreed to let it go. That the room will simply fill around whoever occupies the space next. They are wrong. What I had when I walked into that gala was not power, or a title, or a formal credential of any kind. I had a phone call I had made 4 days earlier. A client relationship I had cultivated for 11 years. An attorney who had spent 60 days quietly reconstructing 22 transfers the person who made them believed were invisible. And a CEO who had been paying attention, who had noticed, years before, that an introduction had come from someone who was not on the payroll, and had filed that fact precisely because precision was how she ran her firm. I am not telling you every room has an Eleanor Fenwick in it. I am telling you that the rooms often have more witnesses than you think. Build the relationship. Keep the contact. Know the names of the people who have been watching. Stay in proximity, or at minimum, stay close enough that when the door opens, you can walk through it. The placement card is temporary. The relationship is yours. If you are somewhere right now where someone has taken your seat, in a boardroom, in a marriage, in a professional life built through years of quiet, consequential, undocumented labor, I am not telling you it resolves quickly or cleanly. It took 60 days of documentation, 7 months of legal proceedings, and one very deliberate woman with a microphone at a black tie event in October. But the record was made, in front of 400 people, in a room where my husband had arranged a printed name card to replace mine. The card was temporary. The Harrington account followed me home. Keep building the record, hold the relationship, come back to the room. The seat was always yours. If this story stayed with you, hit like and subscribe. It helps more people find these stories. I asked you in the middle, has someone ever replaced you somewhere you had built? What happened when they realized you hadn't left the room? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourself. Know what you built. Keep the documentation. Stay close enough to walk through the door. And never confuse a replaced name card with a surrendered seat.